Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Sommer, and I'm here to talk to you about our next unit in social studies. And I'm really excited because we're going to be getting into the U.S. history. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the 13 colonies. And it's really interesting. It's a little different than talking about the explorers coming over, because now we have groups of people coming over for different reasons, like religious freedom, for example. And they're coming over and they're bringing their families. So now we have children, families coming over and settling. So things were a little bit different then. And it wasn't always easy. They definitely had a lot of challenges. And we'll be talking about life, what life was like in the colonies, the different types of colonies. We have the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. We're gonna break each one down moving forward. After our spring break, we will talk a little bit more specifically about the New England colonies. But for now, we're just gonna give you this week as a little overview so you understand what the 13 colonies were, what life was kind of like, why people came over, and geographically where they're located. You're definitely going to have an activity attached to this due Thursday, and you're going to have to label the 13 colonies. And we did a little practice with that last week. So this week, I want to see how much you remember, if you can use your resources and really label these correctly. So, getting into my story, I have a really good story, Colonial America. It's it's actually a kid's life in Colonial America. And it is a really neat way to paint a picture of what life was like for children back in the 13 colony, like when they first started settling, because it wasn't easy. It was totally different to what you would see today. And it's a little lengthy, so I won't be able to read the entire thing this time, but I will read a little bit of the highlighted parts that I definitely would love to hear, have you hear. So we have Colonial America. I'm going to start with the part that says colonial towns. Can you picture what a colonial town looks like? Houses are made of wood. Each house had enough land to raise animals and grow crops. Colonial towns had a few shops, a school, and a church. The church was usually where government business took place. That is definitely a little different than what you would see today. Today, there's definitely government meetings do not take place in churches. Churches are just different places that you can worship whatever religion you have. So that is something that's definitely different today. Moving on. Colonial towns were full of children. Some came from Europe, but many were born in the colonies. Priscilla was a colonial girl who was born in England. Her family traveled to America and settled in Rhode Island colony. Priscilla's parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins lived together in one house. Whoa, that seems like a lot of people in one house. I don't think you would necessarily see something like that today, where you have parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and everybody living in one house. That's definitely something you don't normally see today. So that's different. And then it says here, colonial homes had brick fireplaces. The fireplace often became the center of family life. The fire heated the house and cooked the meals. So people would typically gather around this fire to spend time together. So here's a little picture of colonial towns. You have some kids, trees, got the water. And then this is just a picture of the brick fireplace there. All right. Running a colonial home. Running a colonial home was a lot of work. Most things were done by hand, and everyone had a special job to do. Priscilla's father and uncle cared for their family's animals. They also planted crops, chopped firewood, and fixed tools. Priscilla's boy cousins helped so they could learn how to do these jobs. Women's jobs were different. Priscilla's mom and aunts made the wool and linen used for the family's clothes. They used berries, tree bark, and walnut shells to dye the clothing. Priscilla made butter, soap, and candles with her family. So you can see here that the men and women have very different jobs. The men were, out in the fields, planting crops, fixing tools, and the women were making clothes, making soap, a little bit different there. And it says Priscilla's mom taught her how to spin thread to make cloth. Priscilla would need to know how to do this for her own family one day. So the children learned from their parents because eventually they were going to have to take on all those responsibilities for themselves. All right, let me see. Get to work, it says. Many colonial kids became apprentices or people who learn a trade by working for a professional in a field for a period of time. So again, apprentices, they work with people and learn a specific job. And when they become really, really good at it, then they can go get jobs in doing this job. Colonial boys became apprentices for blacksmiths, shoe keepers, and more. So a lot of the boys would go to these, become apprentices and work with people directly and learn jobs. They would work all day underneath these people and learn specific jobs so that one day they could be really good at it and get a job doing these things. Colonial clothes. Priscilla's family wore the same kind of clothing other colonists wore. Women and girls wore long dresses with petticoats underneath. They wore leather shoes and caps, and men and boys wore breeches, which were long shirts, or they wore breeches with long shirts and leather shoes. Winters were very cold in Rhode Island. Women wore hooded cloaks in winter. Men wore leather breeches, wool shirts, and boots. Outside, they wore coats, mittens, and hats. Staying warm was important. Many early colonists struggled through the cold winters because they weren't prepared for them. And we did talk a little bit about this before, but a lot of people didn't survive the cold winters. They weren't ready for them. And so, yes, staying warm was really, really important for them. Families that later came, such as Priscilla's, learned from early colonists how to get through winter. So luckily, the first group of colonists really set the tone for the other colonists and helped them prepare for what was going to be happening. And then here's a really neat picture of the clothing. You can see the women with their long dresses and petticoats, the men in their breeches, their long shirts. They have these hats. Women wore like these bonnet things. Text to self connection, definitely different than what you would see today. Okay, I'm gonna go right into colonial schools. Now I want you to think about this. Think about if their schooling was similar at all to what you have for schooling, and think about, if not, what are the differences? If they're similar, what are some similarities? If they're different, what are some differences? Just kind of keep that in the back of your mind when I read this. Colonial schools. Colonial children went to school in one-room schoolhouses. Most colonial schools had hard benches instead of desks. Whoa, so right there, totally different. Schools were one room. Can you imagine our entire school just being one room? That would be a little crazy. So their schools were just one room, and they had hard benches. They didn't have desks to work on. They had big wooden hard benches. Many colonial teachers felt students learned best when they memorized their lessons. That meant Priscilla had to remember everything she learned without looking at books to help her. Whoa. Now, there's some things you do have to memorize in school today. When you take your tests, you need to study and make sure you remember things in your memory. But so there's a similarity there. It's a little different because, you're able to use books and study and practice at home. These students in colonial times, they had to memorize things that they learned that day, and they had nothing else to look at or use to help them. Priscilla used a horn book for her lesson. A horn book was a board that had the alphabet, numbers, prayers, and printed on it. Priscilla was allowed to miss school if her family needed help at home. A little different there. You can't really just miss school these days, just if your family needs help. That's not something you would see today. But back then, that was normal. If your family was behind in making their clothes and planting their crops, you have to stay home and help the family because that was the most important thing. So that's a little bit different. So now I'm going to get into school days. Colonial schools were strict. The teacher was allowed to hit a misbehaving student with a branch. A student who didn't know the lessons might have to wear a pointed hat called a dunce cap in front of the whole class. Woo! If you ever thought you had it bad. Back in colonial times, the teachers absolutely did hit the students that weren't behaving with branches. And definitely you would never see that today. You would never see a teacher hitting a student. So that's definitely different. And another thing was that students that weren't behaving had to wear this big, long, tall, pointy hat, and it was called a dunce. And then they had to sit in front of the room. So I'm gonna guess that when that happened, what do you think all the other students were doing? Most likely laughing at that person. And what do you think that person in the front of the room was feeling? Probably super embarrassed. So luckily we don't really do that to you. We don't make you sit in the front of the classroom and wear some kind of crazy hat. So those are definitely different than school today. But it sounds a little scary. I don't think I'd be able to make it in schools during the colonial time. So the last part that I wanted to read was making time for fun. Because I always wondered what did the colonists do for fun? I mean, they had to have stopped working at some point and do something for fun, right? So this is a little section that talks about that. Making time for fun. Colonial life involved a lot of work, but colonists liked it that way. Many believed in living a simple life of hard work. They did make time fun, though. Events to build a new house or barn often turn into community gatherings. Men and boys liked to race. They also had shooting contests. Women went to corn husking bees. They also had quilting bees, where the town's women got together to make quilts. Children had special games too. Priscilla loved to play hopscotch. She and her friends built kites. They also played with marbles. So, I mean, if you're making a text-to-self connection, today we do still have hopscotch, which is fun to play. And we do have kites that you can fly. I know that when, I was much younger, I would fly kites and it was so fun. And, marbles. A lot of toys and games have marbles in them. So that's kind of a neat connection, knowing you played some similar games to the colonial children. But also at the same time, men and women, they're fun, sewing quilts and running races. I mean, very different. Very, very different than what you would see today. Okay, so that's all I'm going to read for now. for colonial America. I have a Google slide presentation that I am attaching to this assignment. And what you're gonna do, and I'm gonna post a video of me reading it, so you, if you have trouble reading it, you'll just play the video and it's me reading it. You're gonna go through and you're gonna read it, and I'm gonna have already highlighted parts so that you know, just like we do in school, the parts that are highlighted are really important parts that you need to go back to when you're answering questions. So you're gonna have a little passage that's highlighted, and on the side, you're gonna have little squares where you answer questions, okay? And then the last page is the 13 colonies map. And we did something very similar last week, except I gave you an example of what it looked like. So now I wanna see if you can really use your resources on your own and label it on your own, which I know you can because you all are so super smart. So we're gonna label the map. And don't worry, because this isn't going, the whole thing is gonna be due Thursday. What I recommend is work a little bit at a time every day. And then that way, if you have any questions as you go, you just ask me the questions right on the assignment. I almost always, like 99.9% of the time, can answer you right back. So if you're stuck on anything, you just leave a little comment on the assignment right on it, and I can comment right back to help you, okay? And then another thing is we have Google Hangouts. Now, we're having a little issue with people calling the teachers a lot, and we can't really be doing that. So if you want to meet virtually and have me help you, the first thing I want you to do is try on your own. Then the second thing I want you to do is to ask questions on the assignment. And if the questions, the answers I give you help you, then there you go. If you're still stuck after those two things, then we will set up a Google Meet where we can work one-on-one, and I can help you through any of this, okay? All right, because you guys are not alone. I want you to know you're not alone. I take a lot of time still planning different activities and making sure you guys have everything you need to be successful, and make sure that you guys are all still learning at home, because that's really important, okay? So good luck with this assignment. I think you'll have a little fun with it. It's really interesting stuff. I absolutely love learning about U.S. history, and I hope you do too. Okay, so bye everybody.